I thought the first night was just weird timing. You know how it is when family comes to stay. Everyone's trying to be polite, trying to make things work. My wife's sister had just moved in with us temporarily. Her apartment had some serious water damage and she needed a place to crash for a few weeks. My wife was actually out of town for work, gone for almost a month, so I figured I'd help out. Be the good brother-in-law, keep things comfortable until she got back on her feet. The guest room was all set up. Clean sheets, extra blankets, everything someone could need. That first night I was deep asleep when I heard my bedroom door creak open. It was past 2 in the morning. I shot up in bed, heart pounding, and there she was standing in the doorway. My wife's sister, wrapped in a blanket, shivering. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "but it's freezing in that room. I can't sleep. It's just so cold." I was half asleep and confused. I told her to check the thermostat, maybe adjust the heat. She said she already tried everything. The cold was just too much. She asked if she could just sleep on my floor just for tonight with some extra blankets. What was I supposed to say? It's family. You don't want to be rude, so I grabbed some spare blankets from the closet, made a little spot on the floor, and tried to go back to sleep. It felt awkward, sure, but I figured it was just one night. Except it wasn't just one night. The next evening, I made sure to check that guest room myself. I went in there, felt around. The temperature seemed fine to me. I even looked at the thermostat. Everything was normal. But that night, same thing. 2 in the morning, my door opens, and there she is again. Same excuse. The cold won't let her sleep. This time I was more awake, more aware of how strange this was. I asked her if maybe there was a draft from the window. She said no. I asked if the blankets weren't warm enough. She said she tried everything. That room just felt different to her. Wrong somehow. Too cold to bear. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell her this wasn't going to work, but another part of me felt guilty. What if she really was cold? What if there was something I wasn't seeing? So again, I let her stay on the floor of my room. I barely slept that night. Just kept thinking about how weird this situation was becoming. By the 3rd night, I was determined to fix this problem. I went out and bought a space heater. A really good one. The kind that's supposed to heat up a whole room. I set it up in the guest room, turned it on high, made sure the room was warm before bedtime. I even added another thick comforter to the bed. I thought for sure this would solve everything. But 2 in the morning came around like clockwork, and there she was at my door again. This time she didn't even wait for me to fully wake up. She just came in, blanket around her shoulders, and said the heater wasn't helping. The cold was still there. Still following her. That phrase stuck with me. Following her. Like the cold was something alive, something that moved. It gave me chills just hearing it. I started losing sleep over this. Not just because someone was in my room every night, but because nothing made sense. I'm a logical person. I believe in facts, in things you can measure. Temperature is temperature. Either a room is cold or it isn't. I checked the thermostat probably 20 times. I put my own thermometer in there. The guest room was exactly the same temperature as every other room in the house. Sometimes it was even warmer because of that space heater running all night. But every single night, without fail, she would come to my room, and every night her excuses got a little stranger. She'd say things like the walls felt cold even though the air was warm, or that there was a chill that came from inside the room itself, like it was trapped in the paint or the floorboards. Things that didn't make any sense but somehow made me feel like maybe I was the one missing something. I tried calling my wife, but she was dealing with her own crisis at work. Time zones made it hard to connect, and when we did talk, she sounded exhausted. I didn't want to burden her with what felt like such a weird, petty complaint. "Hey, honey, your sister keeps sleeping in my room because she says it's cold." Just sounded ridiculous when I tried to explain it. So I kept most of it to myself. Just mentioned that things were a bit awkward with her sister staying here. By the end of the first week, I was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. I'd lie there in the dark staring at the ceiling, hyper-aware of every sound, waiting for that door to open, and it always did, like clockwork. 2 in the morning, sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a bit later, but always in those dead hours of the night when everything feels more intense, more uncomfortable. I even offered to switch rooms with her. I told her she could take my room and I'd sleep in the guest room. That way, if there really was something wrong with that space, I'd be the one dealing with it. But she refused. Said it wouldn't be right to kick me out of my own room. Said she just needed the warmth nearby and sleeping on my floor was fine. She didn't want to be any trouble, except it was trouble. It was becoming a bigger problem every single day. I couldn't focus at work. I was jumpy and irritable. My bedroom, the one place that's supposed to be private and safe, didn't feel like mine anymore. I'd come home and feel anxious about going to sleep because I knew what was going to happen. And the worst part? I felt guilty for feeling uncomfortable. This was family. She was going through a tough time. Her apartment was ruined. She had nowhere else to go, and here I was being selfish about my personal space. At least that's what I kept telling myself. That's what kept me from putting my foot down and saying no. But deep down, something felt off, really off, and I just couldn't figure out what it was yet. By the second week, things had changed in a way I never expected. She stopped asking permission. That's what really got to me. Before, there was at least a knock, a whispered question, a sense that she knew this was my space. But now the door would just open, and she'd slip inside like it was the most natural thing in the world. And she wasn't staying on the floor anymore. The first time it happened, I woke up to feel the mattress shift. My heart just about stopped. I opened my eyes, and there she was, climbing under the covers on the other side of my bed. Not on top of the blankets, not keeping a distance, actually under the covers like we were sharing the bed. "It's just too cold down there," she whispered when she saw I was awake. "The floor is freezing. This is the only warm spot in the whole house." I should have said something right then. I should have told her this wasn't okay, that she needed to go back to the guest room or sleep on the couch or literally anywhere else. But I froze. The words just stuck in my throat. It was the middle of the night. I was exhausted, and part of me was still trying to convince myself this was innocent. Family helping family. Nothing weird about it, except everything was weird about it. I'd lie there completely rigid, barely breathing, staring at the dark ceiling while she settled in next to me. There was always at least a foot of space between us, but it felt like inches. Every small movement she made, every time she shifted or sighed, I was aware of it. Sleep became impossible. I'd just count the hours until sunrise, until I could get up and escape to work. The mornings were almost worse than the nights. She'd wake up around the same time as me, stretch, and thank me for being so understanding. She'd smile, this small smile that I couldn't quite read. Was it gratitude? Something else? I didn't know, and I didn't want to think about it too hard. I tried everything I could think of to fix this situation without causing drama. I suggested she could sleep in the living room, right next to the fireplace. We could set it up really cozy, warm as anything. She said the couch hurt her back. I offered to buy an air mattress, set it up anywhere she wanted. She said those things never stayed inflated, and besides, she'd still be cold. Every solution I came up with, she had a reason it wouldn't work, and every reason somehow led back to the same conclusion. My room was the only place warm enough. My bed was the only place she could actually sleep. I even went as far as calling a heating specialist. Spent $200 to have a professional come out and inspect the entire heating system, with special attention to the guest room. He checked the vents, the ductwork, the insulation, everything. Spent almost 2 hours going through the whole house. His conclusion? Nothing wrong. In fact, the guest room was getting slightly more heat than the other bedrooms because of how the vents were positioned. I showed her the report. I thought maybe if she saw it in writing from a professional, she'd realize the cold was all in her head. Maybe she'd see a doctor, figure out if something else was going on, but instead she just looked sad. Said that experts don't understand everything, that sometimes people just feel things differently. And then she cried. I'd finally worked up the courage to tell her, as gently as I could, that this arrangement couldn't continue, that I needed my space back, that this was becoming too much. But the moment I started talking, her eyes filled with tears. She asked me if I really cared so little about family, if I'd really let her suffer just because I wanted to be alone. She said she'd never felt so unwelcome, so rejected. The guilt was crushing. I felt like the worst person alive. Here was someone going through a hard time who'd lost her home, and I was worried about my comfort. I ended up apologizing to her. Actually apologizing for trying to set a boundary in my own house. That night, she came to my room even earlier. Didn't say a word. Just climbed into bed like it was already decided. And I let her because I was too tired to fight, too confused about whether I was being reasonable or selfish. I texted my wife constantly, long messages explaining what was happening, asking for advice, practically begging her to tell me what to do. But she was dealing with a major project crisis at work, in meetings all day, different time zone, barely able to respond. When she did reply, it was usually something brief like, "Just try to be patient," or "She'll be gone soon." But would she? We'd never actually discussed an end date. Her apartment repairs kept getting delayed. First it was 2 weeks, then 3, then maybe a month. No one was saying when this would actually be over. I started feeling paranoid. I'd come home from work and wonder if she'd been in my room during the day. Nothing was ever moved or disturbed, but I just had this feeling. I changed my routine, trying to come home at different times, thinking maybe I could catch her doing something that would explain what was really going on. My neighbor, an older guy named Tom who I'd talked to maybe twice in 3 years, stopped me one morning as I was getting in my car. He looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure if he should say anything. "Listen, I don't want to get in your business," he started, glancing back at my house. "But I've noticed your guest's bedroom light is on pretty much all night." "Every night. I'm up late sometimes for work and I can see it from my window. She's awake in there for hours before she goes to your room." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "Just what I said. The light's on and I can see the glow of a phone screen or something. She's in there awake for a long time. Then the light goes off and a bit later I see her shadow pass by your window instead." I thanked him, tried to act like it was no big deal, but my mind was racing. If she was awake in the guest room for hours, warm enough to be on her phone, comfortable enough to stay there, then why come to my room at all? The cold story didn't make sense anymore. Actually, it had never made sense, but now there was proof. That night, I decided to test something. I pretended to be asleep but kept my phone recording audio, hidden under my pillow where the microphone would still pick up sound. I wanted to know what really happened in those quiet moments before she came in. What I heard changed everything. I couldn't believe what I was listening to the next morning. I'd waited until she left for work, then sat in my car in the driveway with my headphones on, playing back the recording from the night before. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. The audio started with silence, just the ambient sound of the house at night. Then around 2 in the morning, I heard my bedroom door open, footsteps soft and deliberate, the sound of her pausing near the bed. I'd been lying there completely still, controlling my breathing, pretending to be deep asleep. Then I heard rustling like she was checking something. My phone, maybe, to see if I was really out. Then her voice, barely a whisper but clear enough on the recording. "Let me just make sure." More silence. Then the sound of her phone, a quiet click like she was taking a photo. My blood went cold. Why would she need a photo of me sleeping? But that wasn't even the worst part. A few seconds later, I heard her move away from the bed slightly, and then she made a phone call. At 2 in the morning, standing in my dark bedroom, she called someone. "Hey, it's me," she whispered. "Yeah, he's completely asleep. Doesn't suspect anything." A pause while the other person talked. "No, I'm telling you, this is working perfectly. He feels so guilty about everything. Can't even tell me no. It's actually kind of sad. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst." "Trust me," she continued, her voice carrying this tone I'd never heard from her before. Confident. Almost cold. "By the time my sister gets back, he's going to realize what's been right in front of him this whole time. She doesn't appreciate him anyway. Always gone, always working. I'm here. I'm the one who cares." I had to pause the recording. I sat there in my car, staring at nothing, trying to process what I'd just heard. This whole thing, every single night of this nightmare had been planned. The cold was a lie. All of it was a lie. This was manipulation, calculated and deliberate. She wasn't cold. She was never cold. This was about something else entirely. About getting close to me. About creating a situation that looked like something it wasn't. About making me feel responsible for her comfort while she slowly pushed. Every boundary I had, I felt sick, violated, angry, in a way I'd never experienced before. But underneath all that was fear, because she was right about one thing. How would this look from the outside? I'd let my wife's sister sleep in my room night after night for 2 weeks. Even if I'd spent every one of those nights rigid with discomfort, even if I'd never wanted any of this, it looked bad. Really bad. I sat in that car for almost an hour trying to figure out what to do. I could confront her, but then what? She could twist the story any way she wanted. She could tell everyone I'd invited her in, that I'd been inappropriate, that she was the victim. My word against hers, and I was the one who'd let this situation continue for so long. Finally, I called my wife. I didn't care what time it was there or if she was in a meeting. This couldn't wait anymore. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. "Hey, is everything okay?" she asked, clearly surprised to hear from me during her workday. "No," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Nothing is okay. I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, and I need you to believe me." I played her the recording, told her about the neighbor's observation, about the heating specialist's report, about every weird moment and excuse and boundary that had been crossed. I told her how uncomfortable I'd been, how I'd tried to fix things, how guilty I'd felt about wanting my own space back. The silence on the other end lasted forever. I could hear her breathing, could imagine her processing all of this. "I'm booking a flight," she finally said. Her voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the anger underneath. "I'm coming home tonight, and she needs to be gone before I get there." "What if she says I'm lying?" I asked. "What if she tries to make this into something it wasn't?" "I know you," my wife said firmly, "and I'm starting to realize I don't know my sister as well as I thought I did. Just send me that recording. I'll handle this." I spent the rest of the day at work, unable to focus on anything. Every few minutes I'd check my phone, waiting for something to happen. Around 3 in the afternoon, my wife texted me that she'd listened to the recording several more times and had made some phone calls to family members. She told me to go home and wait for her call. When I got home, my wife's sister was already there, sitting on the couch like nothing was wrong. She smiled at me when I walked in. "Hey, long day?" she asked, all casual and friendly. I didn't smile back. I sat down in the chair across from her and just looked at her until her smile faded. "What's wrong?" she asked, but I could see something shift in her eyes. Like she knew, my phone rang. It was my wife, and she asked me to put her on speaker. I did. "Hi, sis," my wife's sister said, her voice suddenly uncertain. "Don't," my wife cut her off. "I've heard the recording. I know what you've been doing. And I've spent the last few hours talking to other family members about you." The color drained from my wife's sister's face. "It turns out," my wife continued, her voice ice cold, "this isn't the first time you've pulled something like this. Aunt Patricia had to ask you to leave her house 3 years ago because her husband complained about your behavior. Our cousin David's wife said you made her incredibly uncomfortable during your last visit. This is a pattern, and I'm done pretending it isn't." "That's not." "You don't understand," she started. But my wife cut her off again. "I'm on my way home right now. I'll be there in about 6 hours. You need to pack your things and leave. Go to a hotel, go to a friend's house, I don't care. But you cannot be there when I arrive." That's when the mask completely fell off. My wife's sister's face transformed into something I barely recognized. All the sweetness, all the vulnerability gone in an instant. "You're going to believe him?" she hissed, pointing at me. "He's the one who let me into his room every night. He's the one who never said no. How do you think that's going to look?" "I think it's going to look like exactly what it is," my wife shot back. "Manipulation. You exploited his politeness and his desire to help family. You created a situation designed to make him look guilty no matter what he did." The argument that followed was one of the ugliest things I've ever witnessed. My wife's sister went from defensive to aggressive in seconds, saying things I never imagined would come out of someone's mouth. She called my wife a terrible sister, said I'd been leading her on, claimed that she'd only been looking for comfort and I'd made it into something it wasn't. But the worst part was when she looked directly at me, her eyes full of something that looked like genuine hurt, and said, "You wanted this. You never told me to stop. You let me stay in your room every single night." For a second, just a second, that guilt came flooding back, because she was right about one thing. I had let it continue. I'd been too afraid of confrontation, too worried about being rude, too concerned about family drama to put my foot down immediately. "He recorded you," my wife said through the phone, her voice sharp. "We have you on tape admitting this was all planned. Stop pretending you're the victim here." That's when things got really scary. My wife's sister stood up fast, knocking over the coffee table. Her face was red, her hands shaking. "That recording is illegal," she shouted. "You can't use that against me. And when I tell everyone in this family what really happened here, when I tell them how your husband invited me into his bed night after night, we'll see who they believe." "Then tell them," my wife said calmly, "but I'll be playing them that recording right after. And I'll be sharing what Aunt Patricia told me today, and what David's wife said. You've done this before. The pattern is clear." I watched my wife's sister's face cycle through about a dozen different emotions: anger, fear, calculation, desperation. She was trying to figure out her next move, looking for an angle that would work in her favor. "I have nowhere to go," she finally said. And just like that, the vulnerability was back. Tears in her eyes, trembling voice. "My apartment is still being fixed. You're really going to throw family out on the street?" "You're going to a hotel," my wife replied. "I've already booked you a room for a week at the Fairfield downtown. It's paid for. After that, you'll need to figure out your own arrangements, but you'll have time to find somewhere else." "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she said, looking between the phone and me like we were monsters. "After everything I've been through, my apartment flooding, having nowhere to turn, and this is how you treat family?" I finally spoke up. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You used family as a weapon," I said. "You knew I'd feel guilty saying no because you're my wife's sister. You counted on that. Every time I tried to set a boundary, you made me feel like I was being cruel. But this was never about being cold. This was about something else entirely." She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to decide which approach to take next. The tears stopped as suddenly as they'd started. "Fine," she said coldly. "I'll leave. But don't think this is over. People are going to hear about this. About how I was treated. About what really happened here. Let them," my wife said. "I'm done protecting you from consequences." It took her about an hour to pack. The longest hour of my life. I sat in the living room, phone still on speaker with my wife, listening to drawers slamming and things being thrown around upstairs. My wife and I didn't talk much. She just stayed on the line, a presence that made me feel less alone in this nightmare. When my wife's sister finally came downstairs with her bags, she paused in the doorway. For just a second, I saw something genuine cross her face. Not remorse exactly, but maybe a flash of recognition of how badly she'd miscalculated. "I really was cold," she said quietly. "At first. But then, I don't know. Things got confused. I thought maybe, don't," I interrupted. "Please just don't. You know exactly what you were doing." She left without another word. I watched through the window as she loaded her car and drove away. Then I locked the door and finally let myself feel the weight of what had just happened. My wife stayed on the phone with me for another 2 hours, until her flight was about to board. She told me more about the calls she'd made to family members. Apparently her sister had a history of this kind of behavior that the family had been quietly managing for years. A tendency to fixate on unavailable men, to create situations that were inappropriate and then play the victim when called out. "I'm so sorry," my wife kept saying. "I should have warned you. I should have known better than to leave you alone with her. But I didn't blame her. How could she have predicted this? Your own sister, someone you grew up with, someone you trust. You don't expect them to be capable of something like this." The house felt different after she left. I walked through each room like I was reclaiming territory, the guest room especially. I opened all the windows, changed the sheets even though she'd barely slept there, ran the vacuum, trying to erase every trace of what had happened, but the hardest room to face was my own bedroom. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I could go in. This space that was supposed to be safe, private mine had been invaded night after night. I felt like I could still see her shadow by the door, still feel that moment of dread when I'd hear the handle turn. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night. Couldn't bring myself to lie in that bed, not yet. I kept the lights on and my phone next to me, though I wasn't sure what I was worried about. She was gone. It was over, except it wasn't. Not really. My wife got home around midnight. I heard her car in the driveway and met her at the door. We just held each other for a long time, not saying anything. What was there to say? Everything that needed to be discussed had been talked through on the phone. "Is she really gone?" my wife finally asked. "Yeah, completely." We sat up for hours that night, going over every detail again. My wife needed to understand the full scope of what had happened, and I needed to process it by talking through it. She listened to the recording multiple times, her face getting more and more strained each time she heard her sister's voice plotting and scheming. "I can't believe I'm related to someone who would do this," she said. "I keep thinking about growing up with her, about all the times I defended her to other people, and now I'm wondering what else I missed." The next few days were consumed by family drama. Her sister had made good on her threat to tell people her version of events. We started getting calls from relatives, some accusatory, some just confused. My wife handled most of them, playing the recording for anyone who would listen and explaining the full context. The family divided pretty quickly. Some people believed us immediately. especially those who'd had their own weird experiences with her sister. Others thought we were being too harsh, that there must have been some misunderstanding. A few accused us of recording someone without consent, like that was somehow worse than what she'd actually done. But there were also surprising moments of support. My wife's aunt called to apologize for not speaking up years ago about her own experience. A cousin reached out to say her husband had always felt uncomfortable around my wife's sister, but hadn't wanted to cause problems. These conversations revealed a pattern of behavior that went back over a decade. She's done this at least 4 other times that we know of, my wife told me after one particularly long family phone call. Always with married men, always claiming to be vulnerable or in need. Always creating situations that look bad for everyone involved. Why does she do it? I asked, what's the point? My wife shook her head. I've been thinking about that. I think she likes the feeling of being wanted, of being chosen over someone else. Or maybe she gets some kind of satisfaction from causing problems, from being the center of drama. I honestly don't know. The hardest part was dealing with my own feelings about the whole situation. I felt stupid for letting it go on so long. Angry at myself for being so worried about being polite that I ignored my own discomfort. Violated by the invasion of my privacy and personal space. Guilty for letting my wife down, even though logically I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. Sleep became difficult even though my wife was home. I'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced I heard footsteps or the door opening. My wife would hold me and remind me that I was safe now, but the anxiety lingered. My bedroom didn't feel like mine anymore. We decided to make some changes, repainted the walls a different color, got a new comforter and sheets, moved the furniture around. Small things that helped the space feel different, feel new. I installed a lock on the bedroom door too, even though there was no logical reason to. It just made me feel better. About a week after everything happened, I got a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry for how things ended. I never meant to hurt anyone. I hope someday you can forgive me. I showed it to my wife. She took my phone and blocked the number without responding. Don't engage, she said firmly. That's what she wants. She wants back in, wants to create more drama, wants to be the victim who reached out and got rejected. Just block and move on. She was right, but it still bothered me. Part of me wanted closure, wanted to understand why she'd done this. But another part of me knew that engaging would just open the door to more manipulation. My wife ended up having a final conversation with her sister about 2 weeks later. She called from the hotel asking if she could come get some things she'd left behind. My wife met her at a coffee shop instead, with me waiting in the car outside. According to my wife, her sister tried several different approaches. First apologetic, then defensive, then trying to minimize what had happened. It was just a misunderstanding, she kept saying. Things got blown out of proportion, but my wife didn't budge. She told her sister that what she'd done was wrong, that it had damaged their relationship possibly beyond repair, and that she needed to get professional help. She also told her that if she ever pulled something like this again with anyone, my wife would make sure everyone in the family knew the full truth about all of her past behavior. How did she react? I asked when my wife got back in the car. She cried. Then she got angry. Then she said I was being cruel, and that family should forgive family. But I told her that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it didn't happen. And it definitely doesn't mean giving her another chance to do it again. We drove home in silence. I felt relieved but also sad. Sad that this was how things had ended up. That family relationships could be so twisted and complicated. The guest room stayed empty for months. We talked about maybe turning it into an office or a hobby room, something that would change its purpose entirely. Eventually, we did redecorate it, made it into a reading room with bookshelves and a comfortable chair. Somewhere that felt completely different from what it had been. My wife's sister moved back into her apartment once the repairs were done. We heard through family that she was doing okay, had a new job, seemed to be keeping to herself. Some relatives pushed for reconciliation, for us to work things out as family, but my wife was firm. Not now, maybe not ever. Trust once broken that badly doesn't just come back. I learned a lot from that experience, about boundaries and how important it is to enforce them, even when it feels uncomfortable, about how predators use social norms and politeness as weapons, about how the word family can be manipulated to make people do things they know aren't right. I also learned that I wasn't alone in this kind of experience. When I finally felt comfortable enough to talk about it with friends, several of them shared similar stories. Situations where someone had crossed boundaries repeatedly, using guilt and obligation to prevent them from speaking up. It was more common than I'd realized. These days the house feels like ours again. The anxiety has faded, though I'm still more cautious than I used to be. I don't automatically trust people's claims of distress. I don't ignore my own discomfort anymore just to keep the peace. And I've gotten much better at saying no without guilt. Sometimes late at night I still wake up with a start, thinking I hear that door opening. But then I remember the lock. Remember that my wife is beside me, remember that I'm safe in my own home. The cold that she claimed to feel, that phantom chill that was never real to begin with, is gone. The only thing that remains is the memory of how close I came to letting politeness destroy my peace. I never saw my wife's sister again after that day at the coffee shop. From what I hear, she's doing okay, living her life somewhere across town. Part of me hopes she got help, that she figured out whatever was driving that behavior, but mostly I just hope she stays away. Some bridges once burned should stay that way. The guest room gets sunlight now, warm and bright through the new curtains we put up. Nobody complains about the cold anymore because there never was any cold to complain about. Just lies and manipulation dressed up as vulnerability. And I learned the hardest way possible that sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust your own feelings over someone else's words. That's the real story. Not about cold rooms or frozen nights, but about boundaries and manipulation and learning when to say enough is enough.